Discover Placentia, taking place in the Placentia Bay Cultural Arts Centre and hosted by the Placentia Area Historical Society and Placentia 350 Incorporated. This is one of the events to celebrate Placentia's 350th anniversary, commemorating the community having been made a French capital in 1662. During this year, we have many events planned to celebrate the diverse history of this community that include visits and sometimes occupations from such nationalities as Spanish, Portuguese, Basque, French, English, Irish, and Americans. For more information about our history, check out our website at placentiahistory.ca. Our event this evening is being broadcast over the internet by Jason Council of Placentia Bay, assisted by James Newhook and Christopher Newhook. I think James is doing most of the work. His father is sitting down. We are pleased tonight to have our first speaker of the series, retired Deputy Chief of Police Gary F. Browne. I'm pleased to share the following information with you about Mr. Browne. Gary retired from the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary as Deputy Chief of Police Support Services on April 30, 2003, after 31 and a quarter years of service. In May of 2002, Gary was very privileged to have been one of the first 23 Canadian police officers to be invested into the National Order of Merit of the Police Forces Canada at the inaugural investiture held at Government House, Ottawa. Gary became the first native Newfoundlander and Labradorian to be inducted into the prestigious Police Order of Merit. The National Police Order recognizes conspicuous merit and exceptional service rendered to the citizens of Canada. In 1972, Gary won the Police Best Recruit of the Year award and graduated with distinction from a 3-year course at Memorial University in Police Community Relations and Law Enforcement. Deputy Chief retired Browne is the son of deceased Constable Bernard J. Browne and Bridget Mooney Browne. Gary proudly served as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces Regular Royal Canadian Artillery from 1966 to 69 and won the Best Recruit Award at Camp Shiloh, Manitoba in 1966. Gary is and has been a very committed, community-minded volunteer who has served on numerous committees. Past chair of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Advisory Council, past president of the Army Cadet League of Newfoundland and Labrador, past vice president of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 47, Labrador City, past vice chair of the RNC Historical Society, former long-term member of the Signal Hill Tattoo Board of Directors, and is presently an active member of the RNC Historical Society, the Regiment Advisory Council, and the Rooms External Advisory Committee. In 2006, Gary co-authored with Darren McGrath the very popular book, Soldier Priest in the Killing Fields of Europe. In 2008, Gary wrote To Serve and Protect the Newfoundland Constabulary on the home front, World War II, which was critically acclaimed by Dr. Stephen High, Canada Research Chair in Public History, Concordia University. In 2010, Gary wrote the acclaimed book, Forget Me Not, Fallen Boy Soldiers of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, World War I. Gary is presently working on his 4th book. For over 40 years, Gary has been married to Paula Cleary of Harbour Grace, and they have 3 children. Gary, as you might remember, was involved with Placentia last summer as one of the key organisers for the medal repatriation ceremony to return the medals of Lance Corporal Martin P. Kent, who died in World War I. Gary, welcome to Placentia again.
Thank you very much, Tom. I guess you know how old you are and everything you are past something or other. I think I've passed my shelf life by the sound of that, but it's a pleasure to be here. I don't know, Tom, if any of the pre-lecture advertisement you got out when they said I was a cop and I was coming here to talk about the police and what went on in the Second World War, and a lot to do with Placentia and Argentia. I only know 2 or 3 men here, so I'm beginning to wonder were the boys worried that what I was going to say was going to tell on them, so they didn't come. But anyway, thank you so much for inviting me here tonight, and I'm going to keep this in a more relaxed tone rather than a really stern academic type lecture. That's not what I'm here about this evening, and I sincerely thank Tom for that fine introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, happy 350th anniversary. Wow, that's something to be proud of. There are not many places that have that honor, so it's indeed excellent. The existence of this ancient town and area is not by mistake. It speaks so highly of the pride, the resilience, and the commitment of its people. And as our present Lieutenant Governor John Crosby uses the term, your stick-to-itiveness, both in bad times and in good times. And again, I personally thank the Placentia Area Historical Society and Placentia 350 Incorporated for giving me the honor to be part of your Meet the Author ceremony. It is truly a pleasure for my wife Paul and I to be here with you this evening. And I guess once I take over the chair, then I've got you. So whatever goes, I can get away with, and then I'm gone. So you'll have to put up with it. But I will keep it hopefully interesting and somewhat relaxed. But I have got a fair amount of information to give you, so I just ask you to sit back, relax, and hopefully to enjoy. In my presentation tonight, you will get some insight into my book, To Serve and Protect the Newfoundland Constabulary on the Home Front World War II, which you will see there on your screen. And hopefully, maybe if it doesn't take me too long, I'll get a chance to talk about my book, Fallen Boy Soldiers, and also Soldier Priests in the Killing Fields of Europe. There will be numerous mention of Placentia and Argentia in my talk tonight to do with the policing time in the Second World War. So I guess Tom had asked me in the committee to talk about Meet the Author. Well, I'm going to talk about, I guess, the author, and here it goes. I'm extremely proud to say my mom was a Mooney from Branch, my grandmother was a Nash, and my dad was a Browne from St. Stephen's in St. Mary's Bay on the other side of the Irish Loop. From the time I was 6 months old until 14 years of age, my brother Noel and I would spend every summer and every Easter in a beautiful community called Branch. And I can tell you I have as much linkage and reaction to Branch than I had probably even to St. John's, which I'm also. So I guess I had the best of both worlds. I'm a townly, but he's so proud of these roots from outside St. John's, and I guarantee my mom and dad always brought me up to make sure of that. So I'm so proud of those roots. From the time I was about 6 years, my brother Keith and David grew up in St. Bride's. And Mom, after my dad died very young, at 53 years of age when I was in the military, Mom went back on the Cape Shore. As children, Placentia was a welcome family pit stop for us in the old days, as we either prepared to enter or exit that old grueling road called the Cape Shore Road. And I'll always remember we'd go through 2 and 3 sets of fire almost every time. My dad knew everybody in every community right up through. And we used to have an awful lot of job changing the tires. So Placentia was great. When we were coming, we'd come in here and we'd eat as a family, and then coming back the same way, because the North Harbour Road wasn't there. So I have fond memories of Placentia. As kids, can you imagine the back of the car and all the dust, we couldn't wait to get out. So I have lots of fond memories of Placentia. I have another link in this, to this area, which I'm quite proud to say, that in retired Placentia school teacher and prolific writer and storyteller, Marina Gambin, is my first cousin, and I'm very proud of her. And of course, the family are proud of Marina's daughter, Sherry, who works very hard for this area on numerous committees, one such as the Festival of the Sea, which Sherry 3 weeks ago got me onto. Ian, that's another committee I'm on. Sherry works very hard, and the family is also very proud when we learned a number of weeks ago when Sherry's daughter, Victoria, had her writing skills praised in Ireland. So our family is very proud of that. So you can see, I have a lot of links to the Placentia area. And my wife's sister taught school here at St. Anne's. I won't say how long ago, but obviously killed me, she was very young. But she did teach, she met her husband, who was a staff sergeant in the Marines. And they married and both became teachers. Both are retired teachers now. So we had a lot of connection. A cousin of ours, Dolph Nash, also served with the Constabulary at Argentia Placentia during World War II. Dolph would later go on and join the RCMP when we became part of the Confederation. And then in his retirement years, as you probably know, he was also the mayor of Branch, and he did a lot of work for that. And for the past 2 years, I've had the pleasure, and I'll see, I got to see what I'm going to do here now. This could be disastrous for me. Get that up, right? Yep. Well, there you go. Oh, you got it. You want quite over, right? Don't go very far. For the past 2 years, I've had the pleasure and honor of working with Ian Walsh and other members of the Royal Canadian Legion branch in Placentia, and with members of the town of Placentia, with your historical and your cultural societies. And it has indeed been a pleasure, and especially last year when we honored your World War I heroes. And I will never forget that as long as I live. With all that, I feel like an adopted son of Placentia. And I can also assure you that Carolyn Walsh's cooking is going to make sure that Paul and I come back here all the time, because she's one heck of a cook. And I said, as long as I live, I'll never forget that last June 5th, as this proud community paid homage to its 33 fallen heroes of World War I. This parade and commemoration set the bar for Canadian communities, let me tell you. And we are so proud of that. And Ian and Craig Power, we worked really hard for almost 2 years to bring that about. But we knew that we had set the bar for every community in Canada, and Placentia can be so proud of that. And I don't think anyone's going to come there when I say that with pride. I will also, in my mind's eye, I always remember last year coming down the street with Parade Commander Val Kareem marching with so much pride, leading one of the biggest, if not the biggest parade and the most emotional parade that was ever in Placentia. And I'll always remember seeing him as he marched with so much pride for his community. And if you could get a measurement on that pride, we would certainly know. And we were all so proud of that. Also, when able-bodied seaman Heather Barrett recited a mother's prayer from my book, Soldier Priest, I can tell you, every time I mention it, I feel the hair on my neck going back up. And the emotion that young lady put in that poem. And I looked around and I saw people, all their eyes were full of water and emotion during that thing. So those are things that I will never forget. And I will also mention to you, before I get into my topic tonight, speaking of your last June the 5th, Ian Walsh, myself, and Craig Power are also working on a spin-off of that for your community, for your Legion here. And within probably in the next number of weeks, your good president, Ian Walsh, will keep after him. He'll tell you about that. And I think it closes the gap, Ian does it, in the Legion here. And we'll be certainly proud to see what we're working on with that too. Now, let's get back to my book and what motivated me to write To Serve and Protect Soldier, Priest, and Killing, To Serve and Protect Newfoundland and Home Front. And I'll use all this fancy stuff. First of all, we talked about in 1966, this young fellow. This young fellow here, believe it or not, my wife don't you laugh. This is me. And I was a young soldier at the time in the Canadian Forces when my dad, unfortunately, had passed away suddenly. And here is my dad right here. And this is in 1945, the last British governor, MacDonald. He was inspecting the police guard of honor at Old Fort Townsend. This was the chief of police. And proudly, this was my dad right here. I made a promise over my dad's funeral that if God gave me the wherewithal, that I would write the story of these men and what they did in the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. The outstanding dedication, perseverance, and distinction on the home front during World War II. And this is a picture of my dad here again. And rowing is no secret to Placentia, because you always had established rowing crews. Here's the police rowing crew, and there's my father. And of course, as a young cop, I had to row with the police to say I followed in my father's footsteps. And we won't do not as much as these guys did. And they were some athletes, and they were in some shape. They were tough guys, and they needed to be during the war, I can tell you. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, no recognition was ever given to these police or their families for what they did in the Second World War. There were pensions, there were medals given to servicemen from Canada, the United States, and Britain, but there was nothing ever given to the police, not even a thank you. And tonight I'm going to tell you about some of the stuff They did, and they needed to be thanked. And they still need to be thanked. I'm going to tell you about what I'm working on with that too. Thirdly, I wrote it to appease the sense of disappointment felt by the families of the men who served during World War II in the constabularies. This disappointment used to be made abundantly clear to me at the many police funerals I went to as commanding officer. Most of the guys knew I was ex-military, and my dad was ex-constabulary, my uncle Mac was ex-constabulary, Dolph Nash was ex. So anytime some of the older policemen would pass away, the families would ask, get young Browne to look after the funeral. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I went to many a funeral as parade commander, and we would always go back to the house of the police officer who had passed away, and we would talk to their families. And each and every time, whether it was a wife, or a daughter, or a son, or a nephew, or a niece, would come up to me and say, Mr. Browne, why wasn't my grandfather and these men ever recognized? You know, a wife saying, why wasn't my husband recognized? I knew what they did on the home front when I was left home waiting for them to come home. And so that was another reason that I wrote this story. I also write this book out of deep respect for my mom and dad. And it's interesting because I talked to you about the World War II. I wouldn't be around here, and I think only for World War II, because my dad met my mom during World War II. Mom, I laugh when I see this picture. I always had hoped when I found it that it may have been my mom. But Mom, before going into St. John's as a young girl from Browne, Mom worked here at Argentia at the start of the war in the sick bay. She used to tell us about the soldiers and seamen that she was in, who were burnt and had from fires and everything. And she used to write letters home to their families. And she was only a young girl from Browne at the time. So then Mom left there and went into St. John's with the Americans, and she worked at the old USO building on Mary Meeting Road. And that's the picture of this here. And when I see this picture, I sort of I think of Mom, a great person, and like I said, it brings fond memories back to me. And Dad was a young policeman from St. Mary's who had joined when war broke out. They were the first police war class. And Dad was in Fort Townsend, and Mom was boarding with Inspector Whalen right in the square, in Stanbury Square, and his wife was from Branch. So Mom was staying with them, and Inspector Whalen used to, when Mom would look out and see all the policemen, here was all Fort Townsend, and basically right here were the homes that the senior police officers would live in. And Mom lived in one of those, and they would see the policemen always doing their drill, and Inspector Whalen would say, Browne, you know, you pick out a good handsome one there, and there's lots of them there. And so without World War II or Fort Townsend, I guess I wouldn't be around here today, so it means an awful lot to me. The book was also written to address a significant void in Newfoundland history. There was nothing written about this, and I couldn't understand it. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't profess to be an academic. I do a lot of work in history, and people refer to me as author and historian. Sometimes I look around and see who else they're talking about. But it's because of what I have here that makes me pride of being a Newfoundlander and Labradorian that pushes me on. And there are so many stories about what Newfoundlanders have done and Labradorians. Each time I get into a book, I end up going for another book. And my wife just rolls her eyes and says, you're going to start another one? I thought you were going to give this up. But she knows, and so it's also a very important pride. So I'm going to tell you a little bit quickly about the police force. So, and you should know about it, because a lot of these links are back to this town, this ancient town. The lineage of, this is a pit helmet, we call it, the old, real old uniform. But the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, this is the old building. Some of you, I don't want to age anyone, I don't think it's in here that old, or is it kind of secret? But this is in the late 1890s. And right here is what you probably know as the fire department, but it really wasn't. And it really was, because this building here, on this floor, housed the chief of police of the constabulary, who was called Inspector General of Police. His office was there. I'm going to tell you something. Now, I don't know if any of you have relatives in the fire department of St. John's, because sometimes they just look at me when I tell this. But the St. John's Fire Department was called the Newfoundland Constabulary Fire Department. And they had a flag which said Newfoundland Constabulary Fire Department. The fire department was part of the police force. And that, up until 1952, they were called fire constables. And even when I joined in 1972, they still used the term. And I was, said fire constables. That's neat. And if you wonder, the next time you see a St. John's fire truck, you'll see the crown. There are no crowns usually on a fire department's badges now, but there is because of that, because they were part of the constabulary. So this is old Fort Townsend here, and these are the barracks and the places where, like I said, later my mom would live, and it goes over here. It's a very, very ancient place. And the constabulary goes back to 1729, and the naval governor of Newfoundland, Henry Osborne, appointed justices of the peace for the colony. And he also made up constables. And that's why the Newfoundland Constabulary is known as one of the oldest police forces in the British Empire. And it all goes back to the Royal Irish Constabulary. We're very proud of that. Osborne broke Newfoundland into 6 districts. And it won't surprise you, being 350 years of age. It was Bonavista, Vista, Trinity, Harbour Grace, St. John's, Fairland, and of course, Placentia. So the constabulary roots go back to Placentia a long, long time ago, and they're very proud of it. And you're very lucky to have 2 royal police forces policing you here. But all I say to you, and the passion is there, and I don't make any excuses for it, as you celebrate the police force you have today, and rightly so, that came here in 1950, ladies and gentlemen, guys like me in this book are challenging you to remember the police force that were here from 1950 back on to 1729. And that's what this story talks about. And the history of this great old force is uniquely, deeply interwoven into the antiquities of these 6 districts, and of course, which Placentia is one of the oldest. Many police officers, excellent police officers, from the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary were stationed in Placentia, which was then known as the Newfoundland Constabulary. It changed in 1980 when they became royal, when Her Majesty the Queen recognized the service given by these men to our Newfoundland and Labrador. And there was many of them stationed in Placentia. Such names that quickly come to my mind, and there's lots of them, I don't put this too narrow in any stuff, but I wanted to mention a few. There was, of course, Sergeant James Kent, who was the father of Lance Corporal Kent. Head Constable Joseph O'Reilly. Inspector John Sullivan was stationed here, and there's a reason he was stationed here, and some of the men might laugh. And he was worried about the smuggling that was going on between St. Pierre and Cape Shore, Placentia and everywhere else. So Inspector Sullivan was stationed and lived right here in your area. He went on to become the first Newfoundland-born commanding officer of the Newfoundland Constabulary. All the others were from across the pond. 4 of them were Irish, and one was a British Army colonel. But Sullivan, who lived here, walked these streets with your people, the station here, became the Inspector General. So that's a very important thing, I think, to be proud of. And then there were such men, and maybe some of the people here tonight will remember, names like Frank Stamp, the Constable Frank Stamp, the international boxer, the heavy lightweight champion of Newfoundland, who went on to box down in Boston and won many rounds. But he was too old when he started, and it was a depression. So he came back from Boston, thankfully, came back into our force. And I'll tell you a little bit about Frank. And then there was also Jim Lynch, Constable Jim Lynch, who was stationed here in Argentia during the war. Jim, like a number of police officers, when Confederation came in 1950, it's all about our families and trying to do better for them and getting them through school and that. The federal government came in here, and people like whom you know, Sergeant McCormick and Jim Lynch, they joined the federal police forces. Jim became the officer in charge of the railways of all of Newfoundland and Labrador and Cape Breton. So these were all fine, fine gentlemen who were part of the constabulary, and they were stationed here in your area. The constabulary provided yeoman service to the people of Newfoundland during World War II, as outlined in my book, To Serve and Protect. The small, understaffed, and poorly equipped colonial police force, that's what they were called, colonial police force. We were a colony, we were an independent country. And I know everyone in this room is about the age that we can still be proud of that. I certainly am, and I have to be careful of it. Sometimes people from the mainland take it wrong, but I'm just proud of it, that history. And these men showed the true metal that they were made of, especially during World War II. And in that time during World War II, and as you remember, those of you who are historians know about this, the police force came under the governance of the Department of Justice, which was part of what I got a kick out when I saw this name. They referred to the Commission of Government as the Benevolent Dictatorship. And just think about it. That's basically what Commission of Government was. We gave up our right to vote. The only place in the world that has ever given up the right freely to vote. And so when I did my research, when I came upon that term, for the Commission of Government and Benevolent Dictatorship, I thought, well, just hang on and think about it, and it makes sense. The war years were often referred to as the good old times in Newfoundland, and there were indeed many good times, both financially and socially. And many of you will probably, I hope you have seen it, and my wife and I have seen it a couple of times, but the play they did, Rising Tide Theatre, Ending Time with the X, and it was a play that talked about, the socialising and all that. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm here tonight to tell you that there was another time when the blackout was in and there was no one on the streets, only police officers and servicemen. There's I don't like calling it the black side, but there is a dark side. And God bless all those great servicemen and women who came here in the Second World War. 99% of them were fantastic. But tonight, I'm going to talk to you about some of the incidents that happened to your police force, that you will see that it wasn't all about making time with the Yanks, the Canadians, and the Brits, and the fun, and the monies that were poured in. There was another side. And you can't change history, but it's important that you recognize it and not forget what people did. Those committed and often brave policemen went above and beyond the call of duty during the war period. Their families, especially their wives, gave much in support to these five Newfoundlanders for the full duration of the war. The police wives were something else, and I've talked to many children of the World War II police officers, and they talked about their mothers and what strong leadership they gave, and they were the power that kept the family together. And I don't have to tell that because I know I got lots of women here, and a lot of them are mothers, and you know too. But that was the same in World War II with the police and the police family. So the wives had to put up with one heck of a hard time for nearly 5 years. And they were never recognized or never thanked. They are mentioned in my book, I can assure you that. And they had to fill a void left by their husbands, who had very little time off. And I will quote Constable Daly as he talks about detention and when he was stationed in Placentia. They almost had no time off for the full war. So look what happened at home. 4, 5, 6 kids and family. Who looked after them? The wives. And who met the police officers when they came through their doors with their uniforms ripped off them and they were bloodied from fighting all night? The wives. From its early history to the present day, numerous Placentia Bay natives have served with distinction in the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. And for those of you who don't know, yes, your mayor, his father, and his son are all proud native sons who have served or are serving in the Newfoundland Constabulary. In the book, To Serve and Protect, I discussed many items related to World War II on the home front. There was a major reorganization of the constabulary by the Chief of Police, O'Neill. And Chief O'Neill had World War I experience with the regiment, and he was also trained at Scotland Yard. In 1938, the Newfoundland Defence Act came in, and the police had to make plans immediately to protect St. John's, Bell Island, Botwood, Grand Falls, Corner Brook, and Placentia from serious war-related incidents. This was all new. This was a small colonial police force. They weren't used to these things that had to deal with wars and things, so this was all new to them. They had to do security of vital points, like because there was no militia there. In those times, when war broke out, it was only the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. They were the only armed group in this whole island. We had no regiment then. We had no militia then. So when war hit, they had to pick up the slack until the Newfoundland regiment and the Newfoundland militia came about. And they had top secret plans, and I mentioned this in my book, about seizing enemy ships, like at Botwood and at Placentia. Can you imagine here, these are just local boys growing up here, became police officers, and now people are saying, you got to do up plans for seizing of ships. You know, sir, I didn't join the Navy. That's what they had to do. The detailed police reports, these are some of the early police officers. You see the uniforms, look at the beards. I don't think they get away with that today. But you can see they were all lean fighting machines. And they had, this is again old Fort Townsend in the 1800s. The chap there with the white beard up front is the Inspector General of the Police at the County. He was an Irishman. Then, I talk about the detailed report following the seizing of the German ship, the Christoph von Dornum at Botwood. War was declared in 1939, 1 hour after Britain declared war on Germany. The Newfoundland Constabulary in Botwood went aboard the Christoph von Dornum. This is the boat, this is where it happened. and they seized the ship as a prize of war. And they arrested 25 people on it. And again, this was all new to them. Now, the police force ends up with prisoners aboard, POWs. Oh my God, what do we do now? No, not only are we seizing vessels, and there'll be more vessels to come in Placentia, now we have to look after prisoners of war. So you talk about a quick and immediate learning curve. It was amazing. But I had talked to a chap who was young at the time, and he lived in Browne. He told me he can remember as a young kid out on their veranda the day the constabulary arrested the ship as a prize of war. And it'll sound funny to you how I describe this and how he described it to me. But he said, here they were, he was looking at them, and the ship was down there, and he said there was about 10 police officers, and they had a supervisor with them who had a sword that meant he was an officer. And these men had their weapons and bayonets. And he was looking down as a young boy at them and didn't know what to think of it. And they were given the military terms of order arms, slope arms, and they marched down towards the boat. So can you imagine this kid in Newfoundland and Bottle in 1939 seeing armed police officers with bayonets fixed marching down to arrest a ship on the prize of war. And that happened 1 hour after war was declared. Pretty interesting stuff. And why did that happen? It happened because we were a British colony. So we had no choice. They didn't send an email, or no emails, they didn't send a telegram and say, okay, boys, you're going to join the war. We were into it, whether we liked it or not, because we were a British colony. And 25 of these crewmen were taken to St. John's as prisoner of war. Another really interesting thing I found in my research. On the ship was a certain 16-year-old cabin boy. And he was so young, and again, the police had him now as a prisoner of war. No, they didn't ask for this to happen. So what do we do with him? They take him to St. John's. They have these people down at the King George V building. They first put him up in the police barracks. I mean, you know, this wasn't Germany. They didn't know what to do with him. They were, the police inspector's wife was feeding them, cooking for them. And there was one young boy, he was so young, that I guess they thought, let's get this kid back to Europe. Now, he was part of the Axis country. You know, we were at war with these people. So the police and the government got this kid shipped back to England. From England back to Germany at 16. In 1945, when the U-190 submarine was arrested off the Grand Banks and brought into Bay Bulls, and from Bay Bulls brought to St. John's. But in Bay Bulls, these young servicemen and Germans came off the boat. And one of the soldiers talking to the police, they were scared. They didn't know if back home where they were from, if they arrested you, you were probably shot. So they were scared. And when they were on the wharf in Bay Bulls, this younger guy comes forward and uses his name. He said, I want to see Inspector Barton. I want to see Inspector Barton. And they were looking at him and said, who's that? So they said, he's a policeman. And I lived with him and his wife, and they fed me. This was the same kid who ended up going back and joining the German Navy, became somebody, shipping back here. He gets caught and he says, well, I was here with the police. I'm sure the Royal Canadian military guys with the Navy patrol didn't know what to do. They knew they were right. So I thought that was really interesting. Then there was a story of the constabulary assisting the military in the early months of the war. Our chief of police became the recruiting officer for the militia. Now, this is the top of our organization. He now has to fill in and start recruiting for the militia because Newfoundland was in trouble. They didn't have enough police, and there was no way the police force would be able to look after it. And we were a very important place during the Second World War. Don't let anyone tell you any different. And Newfoundland was never, and is still not, in my mind, given its proper place in the support that we gave to the Allied war effort. And Placentia / Argentia, one of these most important places. And we're still, in my mind, haven't been given that this very day. So, and there was also a police sergeant, Mike Mahoney, who I'll talk to you a little bit more about. He becomes the recruiting officer for the Naval Reserve. These guys are just police officers, now thrust into really different job roles. And yet, we're never thanked. The book also describes how the police had to provide for protection for all designated vital points until the militia was formed. Vital points such as water supplies, electricity, or transatlantic cables. There was 10 to 12 transatlantic cables coming in here. They'd be a place that if we want to cut the Germans or blow up, would really throw us into, or listen into, even better. So the police I was talking to an older policeman. He was telling me, he said, Gary, that was wicked. He said he could remember down in Quite Violet in Cutler's Cove, one of the transatlantic cables came in there, and he said he used to go in there in the nighttime with a gun and a bayonet and lie in the grass. They were afraid that the German agents were going to come and try to get at these white-outs. So talk about something that was different for the police, and they had to do that. I discussed early on, I mentioned to you, and I didn't use the term, but you know it here, called a friendly invasion. And that's what it was called when all the Canadians, all the Americans, and some Brits came in Canada. It was called a friendly invasion. But as I said to you, it caused many significant organizational and personal challenges for the Newfoundland Constabulary. Criminal jurisdiction between Newfoundland and the military was often a nightmare for government. And I'll give you an example. Right here in Argentia, what was happening was, these are strong, powerful nations. The Americans are coming in, and they're not used to being told by other people, you know, you got to do this, or you better do this, or you're not home, you're not going to do this. It's a big, powerful organization. They came in. They came in mainly here in Argentia. And then we had police officers in Argentia, and when someone was arrested or something, normally they did whack and dealt with them. They weren't used to, whoa, hang on, boys, you're in a foreign country. This is our country. You know, we have jurisdictional rights here. Have you? This is the war. So major problems caused in criminal jurisdiction between the police and the military during the Second World War. My book also deals with the overall command problems between the Canadian and Americans. And at times this was unbelievable. And here's one of the times which was really unbelievable. For those of you who recognize it, this is the Knights of Columbus, of course, before that tragic fire in 1942, where 99 people were savagely burned to death. This is it, just over by the old police station. And when after that inferno, or during it, that was a fire. It was a major emergency, not being wartime or being wartime. It was a major emergency which the civil jurisdiction has command, which is your police service, and then your fire service if you're fighting the fire. So when this broke out, and because there were so many servicemen in there, and that problem of jurisdiction was there, the chief of police, who was one of the most powerful people then in our colony, he was forbidden by the military to go across the lines and go into that place. They said, no, you're not getting across, this is military. And of course, you know what hit the fan. And there was an inquiry done by Justice Dunfield, and he came out and he was very critical and said this should never happen again. This is the police concern. But here was, can you imagine? There wasn't many fellows would tell the chief of police in those days that he wasn't going somewhere, but he wasn't at first allowed to even go across the lines. And during that time, and I've been trying for years to match together things, and new things have been found to find out who were the Knights of Columbus. And my dad and many of the police officers firmly believed it was arson, and the judge said that it was incendiary, they couldn't prove it. But I believe the same thing my dad and those other police. This was arson, and I certainly believe it was war-related. But here again was this problem of jurisdiction between the military and the police. In my book, I also talk about the paranoia that involved in Newfoundland with the dread of military attack and enemy activities, especially from submarine attacks, and that happened at Belle Isle and St. John's, and the numerous fires we had. And we had many suspicious fires in Newfoundland, and they just couldn't get a handle on it. And you had about 20,000 servicemen in St. John's at the time, another probably 20,000 servicemen out here, and we'd go in and visit a lot. And it was, German activity, and so that we had suspicious fires, and there was a lot of things going on. In my book, I quote many secret and top secret telegrams between the Newfoundland government, Canada, and the UK. And this is the first time they were brought up, a lot of them, in my book. I guess I was lucky because I'm a retired deputy chief of police. And people keep saying that to me, oh, it was easy for you to get this stuff, because you're an ex-cop. Well, so what? But I brought these things forward. And this is I talked to you about the security division of the constabulary. The constabulary started as a security division for the war because the police were responsible for all civil security in Newfoundland, the whole lot. And this chap here, Inspector Mahoney, was in charge of that group. And these are all different senior police officers and members who they were doing, as you can see, they were talking about strategies. It all to do with wars and crime and agents and what they do. They had to check the people's letters and see what they were writing, because soldiers were writing home and people were writing back, and they were afraid the Germans were going to get a hold of these letters and find out what's happening. Because as you know, out here and in St. John's and Bath, you were not even allowed to tell if a ship came into the harbor, because loose lips sink ships. And ladies and gentlemen, I saw a picture or a diagram of all the ships and submarines that were sunk in and around Newfoundland, and it today blows me away. We were part of the war effort. We weren't just out on the fringes, let me tell you. And this security division that was there played a major role. And Mahoney went down with the FBI and studied during the time to talk about these things, about agents in war. And I don't know if you look, you just barely see this picture up here? Well, there was a movie just came out last week about it. That is James Edgar Hoover. And Inspector Mahoney did the courses down there and became a good friend. And a lot of the times, and even in Argentia, James Edgar Hoover was putting his long tentacles out here, and he was having our policemen in Placentia and Argentia do investigations for him, James Edgar Hoover, in charge of counterintelligence and espionage in North America. And our police officers were doing investigations for James Edgar Hoover. So I thought that was really neat. So I did it, and I read it in my research about the picture he had, and lo and behold, I had a strong look at his picture. This is James Edgar Hoover. And this division did a heck of a lot, the security division. Then there were stories like the one of the Labrador intelligence incident, where they had a stranger who was writing from in Canada, and he was asking about certain parts of Labrador and the topography of it. He was wondering about what was flat land. And all the stuff, why is someone wondering about flat land? The military intelligence became very worried, and the police checked into this person, and they couldn't come up with the person who was writing the letters. It was fictitious, and they didn't know who it was. And what they figured was the questions that he was asking, he was looking for a place that the Germans would set up a possible airstrip in Labrador. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a military historian, but I think all that off Hitler made a big mistake in his own right, and thanks be to God he did. Because I think if he had paid more attention to Newfoundland and take Newfoundland, Canada and the United States would have been in a heck of a lot more trouble. He could have put his submarines here, his bases here, his aircraft here, and he had the whole back of Canada, and he had Belle Isle cut off in Canada, which supplied 60% of the steel to the war effort. So I'm glad Hitler didn't do it. But if Hitler had been looking at Newfoundland, he probably would have had a very important leg up on everyone else. The book also tells about an internment camp built at Victoria. This is astounding in Carbonear. There was a POW camp built, and it was huge, and it was all new equipment put in, and the best. And what they were looking at, the Brits wanted a place to send POWs, prisoners of war who were in the German Air Force mainly. And what happened after there was a bombing of a ship coming over here, and children were also, if there wasn't POWs, they were thinking about sending poor kids from England, the children of war, come over here too. But what they said was, they better not, because they may be torpedoed on the way over. But here was this place in Little Carbonear, Victoria, totally built. And I looked at the specs on it. They had everything there. But they had to tear it down after. I think they wanted to, because they were trying to say, because Newfoundlanders were saying, well, what about if we bring these POWs and they escape? Now we got Germans running around here. So it was something. It was a very interesting story of the Carbonear prisoner of war camp. I also discussed a tremendous challenge for the constabulary in tracking the alien labor force working on military bases. I haven't got to tell you about that here. The constabulary had to get the name, place of birth, every person who came into Newfoundland, from Port aux Basques to St. John's. The security division was responsible for it, and they had to check them out. And not only had to check them out, but they had to try and keep tabs on them. For 8 or 10 men, they worked day and night, and I don't know how they did it. That's why all these people who were at Argentia, who were away, well, away to them was Canada, we weren't Canadians, from Canada and the United States that were working here, the police had to try and keep tabs on them because they were afraid of German spies. So you talk about a job this security division had. And then there was one of the greatest challenges for the police, which I mentioned to you earlier on, as it related to law and order, and that's the safety of our people during the blackout. And the blackout was a defense regulation. And you'll see, I'll show you in another slide. This here was one of the ships that were, remember I said to you the fear of and the paranoia. This was the Saganaga, excuse my pronunciation for anyone here who knows better, but it was one of the iron ore ships that was sunk off Belle Island. And this is right in their own homes. Two ships were torpedoed, and in this one 25 people died. Right in Belle Island, and we have people going back and forth to Belle Island, police officers all the time, because Belle Island was really important, because they were supplying steel. And for those of you who know your history, before the war broke out, who were the people who were the greatest buyers of that steel? Germany. All the German captains of the ships for years had become the Belle Island, and they knew that area like the back of their hands. These guys go back and war break out, some of them become submarine commanders. You wonder why they sank the ships off Belle Island? They knew everything about them, why they were hot. So that was a really important role. I also write on the role of a name you probably haven't heard in a while, called the USOs, and the recreational facilities during the war. The Caribou Hut in St. John's, which is right here. The KFC, the USOs in Argentia, the USOs in Corner Brook, the Red Triangle Club, the Gould's Navy Club, and there were many, many more. The statistics of these things, I just want to grab my book. Read. This is the thing when I do my research really showed me when you say, well, how many people were in Newfoundland during the war? And this was a report of the Caribou Club for the war. It says, though the figures can look dull in print, the following must surely live because they grew from small beginnings of a group of people in the Patriotic Association. At the Caribou Hut, there was 253,551 beds rented out. 253,551 beds. Who slept in the beds? People who slept in the beds, some of them were suffering from post-traumatic stress when they went downtown in the blackout in St. John's. Who looked at it? Who tried to look at it? The police. At the restaurant in the caves, or the King George V building in the Caribou Hut, the restaurant served, get this, these are the exact figures, 1,545,766 meals. 1.5 million meals served during the war. Just this place alone. Think of the people they were serving it to. Their cinema offered 1,518 movie shows to these poor servicemen, and mostly Navy, who were in there suffering from post-traumatic stress after seeing their buddies die violently at the hands of German U-boats. As a social center, it gave 205 Sunday night sing-alongs. Pretty good for these servicemen. As a dance hall, there were 459 dances with orchestras and suppers to go with them. No small feat. These were all volunteer Newfoundlanders. And the theater showed 395 entertainments. That was just during the war, just in St. John's at the Caribou Club. So this was really amazing. Fighting in the streets and the clubs were major areas of concern for the police and for the wives and families of the police officers. And most of the time in the night times, they were fighting, basically fighting. Now, guys looked at it, and like my dad, he was about 6'1". Most of the guys then, people often joke, years ago, did you see them big cops, big out harbor men with the size of hands on them? Boy, they were too. Luckily enough, I didn't feel my father's hand, but I was afraid. And when they went up, that's why I became a good athlete. I could run fast. But these were big men, and they had to be. But they were also men, human beings, fathers, sons, and they had hearts too. But they had to be tough because of what they put up with during the war. I also discussed the violent attacks on police, which were directed towards them as they did their duties, and the injuries that happened. And I gave one example in my book. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Ducker Street, police officers walking up the street. A young kid comes down and says, "Sir, there's 2 servicemen after damaging a car and are into that store." He said, "Okay, son, show me where it was." He walks out at 3 o'clock at Ducker Street, sees the 2 guys. He goes in, talks to one, and he says, "You're under arrest for damaging the car." The other guy comes in around behind him, and I'm not knocking them, they were from Pepco, and took out the police officer's bat and smashed him in the skull. The police officer goes down in the store in a pool of blood and the two military guys are kicking him. It's just 3 o'clock in the daytime. And luckily enough, and I tried my best to come up with the man who helped him, there was a longshoreman and another chap, but the longshoreman from Signal Hill, and I did everything. I combed that area to find out who the man who saved the life of that police officer that day. And he went in, and he was a tough longshoreman, and he, matter of fact, he and the other guy, he took the baton from the American servicemen, hit one of them, and he knocked the other guy down. And by that time, police had heard about it, and they came up. Well, I think that if they had that longshoreman, that Newfoundlander hadn't come in and helped the police officer, the women were crying and screaming because there was a police officer down on the floor covered in blood, and these guys were kicking and beating him. And so that's the kind of things that the police officers had to put up with. And there was another police officer walking home on 4 to 12 after doing the work all day during the blackout. He was jumped not far from the police station, and he got quite the beating too. So it wasn't all about social enjoyable times. There were troubled times, and especially for your police force. And then I remember reading about the Donnybrook, and that's what I call it, on Lugar Street and Adelaide Street in the middle of the day. Servicemen came out and got into it. I think they said there was approximately 100 to 200 servicemen fighting in the streets. And one of the guys, Colonel Cowan, was a young Cowan's farm. He used to deliver milk, and he told me he could remember seeing this. And he said they were all out in the street fighting, and he said just up from, some of you can remember the police officer doing duty. They said the police officer had to do duty, and he was still there doing duty, and 150 servicemen were just down the road, smack for smack. So, I mean, they were, and I call it the Donnybrook at Adelaide Street. My book also details rural policing during the years of the war, like in some rides, Bay Bulls, Argentia, Rockwood, Bell Island, Corner Brook, etc. I took this picture, I think it was last year or so. This is all that's left of the old police home in some rides. And the police were there during the Second World War, even before that, they used to stay there. And I think later, for those of you who know the area, I think it became a medical arena. I think nurses had it too, but that's all that's left of the old police home. In my book, I talk about the rural policing, and not only in St. John's, we had, I'll give you an example. There was a young policeman, Gilbert Hiscock, stationed in Carmenville, the definition of Sleepy Hollow. The war breaks out, and in 1942, a plane crashes just outside of Musgrave Harbour. He's dispatched to go find out what happened. There was deaths involved. Here's a young police officer in Sleepy Hollow, like I said to you. Plane crashed. Who was on the plane? No one else but Nobel Peace winner, Dr. Frederick Banting, who was a major in the Canadian Forces at the time. And a lot of people don't know about Dr. We all know why about Dr. Banting, penicillin. But you know what else he was working on? He was working on biological warfare. And the Germans were after him, knew he was one of the best. But Banting was also working on that. So here's the young constable who leaves Carmenville and goes out there. Yeah, there's the plane crashes. And this young constable from Sleepy Hollow now has to do an investigation into a Nobel Peace winner who died. So how things could change during the war because there's so much going on here. And poor Constable Gilbert Hiscock, I'm sure he never got over that. Then I talk about the seizing of another prize of war. That is right in your area, here in Argentia, Placentia, and that was the warship, or the Phoenix ship SS Aardvark. And I'll talk a little bit more as I quote from the police officers here in Argentia who had to go to that. I talk about the top secret ships that came into St. John's in the middle of the night, and no one knew what they were. Americans, because they were highly trained radio intelligence people, and the FBI were on board. And I don't even think the constabulary knew that the FBI were there. They were coming in, they were concerned about Newfoundland. Later to discover, of course, the major German spy. After, unfortunately, my book had been written by this time, but I recently found out, and I did an article in the Telegram, that you hear people, even historians say, nothing happened in Newfoundland, there were no Germans, no spies. Well, I say the heck there wasn't. One of the biggest German spies was a Portuguese radio man on the ship the Gillianis, and a lot of us know that name was the Gillianis, was the Portuguese hospital ship. Did you ever hear tell of the White Fleet? Why were they called the White Fleet? Or why were they white?
They're neutral.
Yeah, but why? What else did they tell? They were neutral between the Allies and the Axis. They're white. You know why they were painted white? so the German submarines would know that these were the Portuguese. That's why they were called the White Fleet. Because where were they? On the Grand Banks, fishing, right? And up in the Labrador Sea. Where was one of the most important routes for the convoys? Going, saving Britain, saving the world. Where were the convoys coming? From Halifax and Newfoundland. And from Argentina. Where were they heading? Right next to the Grand Banks. This guy was a Portuguese radio operator, a senior operator. And I found out later, through top secret MI5 papers that I saw over in London, England. And he was in St. John's, a spy. And the FBI came here to try to grab him, and he had just left. And he was so important that they got him out to Grand Banks. And a Navy ship, a British Navy ship, was following him. And just before the convoy that was coming, they arrested him. Guess who was in the convoy? General Patton. Guess where General Patton and the convoy were going? To North Africa. Operation Torch. That saved the war. If this radio operator had not been found, and the Constabulary Security Division were involved in this investigation, if he wasn't found, and that convoy passed by, and he identified them to the Germans in Portugal, the Nazis, that's where they were. They were operating this guy out of Portugal. Lisbon was the home of the Nazi spies. And that's where he was being operated from. If he had to find out that Patton was on that and tell him, we could be all going around with shorter mustaches and saying Zikali Fiore. And that was proven by historians. They said it could have changed the outlook of the war. And that same guy was in St. John's many times. I only found out later. I wish I had found out before, my luck. But I tell the story now. And then also, I found out about a customs officer that I recently had put on the peace memorial in Ottawa. George Jackman died suspiciously in St. John's Harbour. Customs officer who was helping the police looking for spies and that. 5 customs officers go on board in the middle of the war. They're all there looking at each other. They go through the ship from a foreign country, and then they get off. And one of them says, "Where's Jackman?" They said, "Well, he was with you, wasn't he?" "Yeah, well, I thought he was with you." They go back on board the ship. Can't find Jackman. Never found his body. Never found his hat. Nothing floating. And as a police officer in my early days too, usually when someone drowns in the city and the harbour, they'll come to the top mostly, and they also find their hats and things like that. It was never found. And I've spoken to men who were senior merchant marine, and they tell me that they strongly believe, even to this day, that that man was put in the furnace. Because why wasn't there anything showing or left of him? And they still never found him. When I did the investigation, and I learned that his body, or his graveyard, they put a tombstone in the family up in Belvedere Cemetery, and it was on his thing, "Died at sea." And I said that was so wrong. Because died at sea, as you all know, usually the ship sinks. This man didn't die at sea. He died in Newfoundland doing his job. And he was a World War I Beaumont Hamel veteran. And I looked into it and I said, this is wrong. And I went to work with it and I did research and I sent it away to the Canadian Peace Officers Memorial, and they agreed. His name is now on the Peace Officers Memorial in Parliament Hill, because he died. This happened during the war. What happened to his body? Then there was, of course, the constabulary. They had their own St. John's Harbour Patrol. Police were also involved in censoring letters, and Jim Lynch tells a little funny thing I'll tell you about this area, where he had to censor letters coming from women going back and forth. And he said he felt like he was Anne Landers looking at everybody there. Also, something I found I didn't know was naval sabotage in St. John's Harbour during the war. Guess whose ships it was done to? Canadian Navy. We had our own ships sabotaged in St. John's Harbour, and the constabulary were involved in those investigations. And they were thanked by the government of Canada and the Navy for what they did. And then, of course, was the Placentia Bay wartime mystery of the major explosion at Fox Island Pier in 1943. I talked to the gentleman I quote in my book, Mr. Browne, who's no relation to me, from Salvage originally, and he told me he was out here and working with the Americans on the pier, and when they were in bed, there was one horrible explosion, and it shook everything. And they came out, and here was the wharf all burst up and a big hole in it. And he said they were told, don't you open your mouth to anybody about this. And to this, he just died not too long ago. And he said to this day, they believed it was a torpedo, as the Americans were building this pier for their ships, American ships. I'm not sure what location, I'm sure you are, where exactly it was. That was something that was never told about before. And then there were other challenges, such as the Americans' miners' strike. Some of you should probably, I think there's a picture here of Sergeant Ned Carroll. Apparently he has a tremendous individual that we should all celebrate, who was here in charge of the Argentia detachment of constabulary during the war. And of course, construction began at Argentia in 1941, and also for Fort McAndrew. I never knew that in my days. I didn't know it was called Fort McAndrew, the soldier side of the base, not the Navy side. And the people who were uprooted, and there's probably people here today who have parents from Argentia and Marquise, the police were involved in that, the constabulary officers stationed in Placentia, and they were also involved in the exhuming of the bodies in the graveyard, because they had to be by law. Pretty gruesome stuff, pretty hard stuff on the community, pretty hard stuff on police officers. Police officers are supposed to be, well, they're tough. Nothing, they don't take that hard. They do, they're human beings. So they're involved. From the moment the Americans arrived, Newfoundlanders were determined to find work on the bases. Poor winter working conditions, a lack of accommodations, and the oscillating demand for labour marred the first months of construction. After having financed the journey by rail or steamship with credit from local merchants, many hopeful employees had to return to their homes empty-handed in 1941 after visiting Argentia and Placentia. Joseph Hanrahan of Marystown on the Burin Peninsula, for example, had stayed in Argentia for a week in a fruitless search for work. Some nights he slept under upturned dories on the beach, and other nights he joined 200 people as they slept in a coal shed in the Placentia area. I'm not sure about where that was, but this man told a story. They were here looking for work, and there was 200 people on the sleeping in coal sheds and on their boats on the beach looking for work. Times were pretty tough then. And that's what your people here were also subjected to, caught in the middle of them. Each day, men from the widely scattered Newfoundland communities on the south coast would make their way to Argentia, using every means available to get there, jackboat, steamer, and even by using motorboats. The friendly American invasion of Newfoundland thus triggered far-reaching social effects for the people of Placentia and Newfoundland in general. During my research, I came upon many examples of criminal jurisdictional issues I mentioned to you. I'm going to give you an example at Argentia base in 1942, where a Newfoundlander sued the American military for wrongful arrest. The man had been working in the barracks building as a janitor. He had been collecting contributions for the Newfoundland Patriotic Association for the servicemen and women in World War II over in Europe. That's what he was collecting for, $1 per person. He went on to tell how he was walking to the barracks when he was arrested by 2 military policemen. He was then taken to the American chief of police, as he called him, on the base, and the chief told him no money was to be collected on the base. The Newfoundlander said he tried to explain to the chief, but the chief wouldn't listen, and he was locked up. And I said, I have a note to read from my quote. This is a quote of his statement that I found given to the police, given in his trial when he was looking for this, that he was suing the military. He said, the chief told me that no money for any purpose would be allowed to be collected on this base. He refused to hear anything further from me and ordered me locked up. In the cell in which I was locked up, there was not a bed, not a blanket. The floor was practically bare, and when the night came, I lay on a piece of canvas on the floor. I was locked up from 4 o'clock on Tuesday evening. About 12 o'clock that night, I was brought a cup of tea and a slice of bread. I received nothing further to eat until 3 p.m. the next day. On the second night, the chief of police called to see me. I asked him, was this the way he treated prisoners in the United States? No bed, no blanket, no water to wash, and scarcely anything to eat? His reply to me was, this is not the States. The following day, the third day of my imprisonment, I was privileged for the first time since my arrest to go to the theater washroom opposite the police station for a wash, and only after challenging their system, I was supplied with blankets and regular meals. On Saturday afternoon, about 3 o'clock on the 28th, not having had any dinner, I was taken by a police car to the barracks for clothing, then to the administration building for my check, and then to the hospital, and from there outside the gate where I was dropped. On the way into town, I was talking to one of the men who contributed to me, and he told me they haven't received any money, and they weren't accepting any money back. He also told me if he hadn't been released on Saturday, that the Newfoundlanders working at Argentia were going to demand his release. Kind of an interesting story from a man who was working at Argentia with that jurisdictional and criminal problem. He should have been arrested by the constabulary if he was arrested. And I don't think the police would have arrested him for collecting $1 for people working for the men overseas. But unfortunately, again, because of what happened. I mentioned to you earlier on that international boxer. There he is there, Frank Stamp. And he was as powerful. In the summertime, or in the winter times, he and his wife used to break the ice in Long Pond and swim. He was a long-distance swimmer. And during the war, he was chasing a young chap down a Newfoundlander in St. John's for breaking entry. The guy jumped into the harbour. He picked the wrong night and jumped into the harbour. Stamp jumped into the harbour and arrested him. This was also Constable Leonard, who was stationed at St. Bride's. He was stationed here in Placentia during the war. He was a World War I veteran also. So these were men who were right in your midst during the war. This is very interesting. Tom O'Keefe, of course, and the people in Placentia passed this on to me. This is a beautiful picture of the people here who were. These are the police officers: Acting Sergeant Shea, Constable Fury, Constable Bill Daly, and Constable Eric Grant. We've done everything. I've tried to found, I think, for your historical societies. Is there anybody, I wouldn't be lucky enough, does anyone here identify those places? Who were they? It was during the 40s, probably during the wartime, and I don't know, I think, Tom, somebody knows what this area looks like. And but I'd love to be able to come up with these two guys. I'd love to be able to find out if they're alive, but I don't think they were. And talking about Frank Stamp again, I don't know if anyone could remember their parents telling them, during the war here, there was a private dance put on for the Norwegians. And the local girls to Placentia were invited. But there was no one else supposed to go to this dance, only the Norwegians and the local girls. Americans came off the base, 4 of them, and the constabulary and Constable Stamp and another officer were sent down and said, "Now boys, no one gets into this dance, only Norwegians and local ladies from Placentia." And they said, "Okay, sir, that's your orders." 4 Americans came up to the police and said, "We're going in there." And the police too said, "No, you're not. Sorry, boys. This is private." And the Americans, and I got to quote, the American soldier turned around to his buddies and said, "We're not going to let a bunch of Newfie cops keep us out of this dance, are we?" And they attacked the police officers. Within about 10 seconds, 4 of them were on the ground. That was Constable Frank Stamp, the boxer. So it wasn't the old saying goes, well, make sure this is engaged before this is engaged, because your head will take a beating or something in your mouth that went to it. And that was sort of a legendary thing amongst police officers. They would talk about when Frank cold clocked the 4 Americans out in Placentia one evening to the dance. But Frank was as big and tough as he was a kind-hearted man and a long-distance swimmer. And in the summer times, on his few days off, he would help young Newfoundlanders in St. John's who was poor and that taught him how to swim. He was a very kind man, and my father-in-law talked so highly of him. And I just wanted to tell you, ironically, Constable Frank Stamp died in the line of duty on May 27, 1954. He died at approximately 1 a.m. at the police station on Water Street while processing 2 servicemen from Pepper, whom he had just chased and arrested for a previous assault. And Frank was in the lockup writing these guys up. And Constable Bill Daly, my father's friend, Bill was there. And Bill said he was just standing there and he was taking notes from the guys, asking them where they're from. And Bill said he noticed him turn white and started to rock. And he went down, and Bill went down on the ground with him, put his hands on him. And he said he could tell by the way he was frothing and shaking and white. And Frank said he said the Our Father with him, or Bill did. He said he died in Constable Bill Daly's arms. And it was only up until a number of years ago I said, why wasn't Constable Frank Stamp put on the Peace Officers Memorial in Ottawa as died in the line of duty? No one had an answer for it. Well, I started to say this has got to change, and I got all the research done. I wrote the police memorial, and Constable Frank Stamp is on the memorial as died in the line of duty, which he did die and their family were so happy. And his daughter is still alive, and she cries every time she talks about it. And she's thanking me. I said, "Don't thank me, man. We need to thank Frank Stamp." So that's how poor Frank died. Constable Bill Daly was twice stationed in Placentia. Again, this big handsome guy here. And he was big, and was gentle. And he was my dad's best friend. He was also from St. Mary's. He spoke very highly of Sergeant Ned Carroll, the police supervisor at Placentia. Bill said, and I quote, Bill's talking about the police in Argentina now, He said, and Placentia, the police were sheriffs, relief officers, they moved people from their homes to make way for the American bases at Argentia. They destroyed dogs. They tested drivers for licenses. They raided bootleggers. They broke up fights between servicemen and civilians. And they prosecuted their own cases in court under the watchful eye of Magistrate Lineker. Constable Daly later became sergeant, talked about his war-related service with the constabulary in an oral interview. And here's what he said, and I quote, "There was a good bit of crime going on down in Argentia at the time, but it was mostly minor, although some very serious crime did take place. We worked as much as 16 hours a day during the war. This was a War Measures Act, and hours didn't count. Long days on patrol, both on the base from Placentia to Branch to Colonette and down the bay. Often we had to escort American payroll to Argentia." I love this story. He said as much as $250,000 in cash for the American servicemen. They had to take it from the bank here and go across the Gulf and pay these people. And he said, all I had was a small .38 revolver stuck under my coat. $2,000 worth of cash. I don't think Brinks would do that today. And he said, we carried the payroll across Placentia, got to Argentia, and the American servicemen were known to save their money at the time. So he said, we nearly had as much to take back to the bank in Placentia on our way back. One police officer. He said, Bill used this number, and some of the historians here, I couldn't get a handle on it. But here's what Bill said. He was stationed here in Argentia. Over 22,000 servicemen were there at one time. We sailed around Placentia Bay a couple of times in the Department of Education boat, the Skellia. Jack Pitcher ran the boat. Always, one way or another, we were dealing with the Americans. We did patrols in Jeep with the Marines when the road was completed. They would take care of the military personnel, and we would take care of the civilians. So I got this image of a Marine MP and a constabulary fellow in a Jeep going around opening up. If there were civilians fighting, the constabulary fellow would arrest them. If there were Americans fighting, so it's quite a thing. You guys can probably remember this. He said, one night there was a riot of about 150 Newfoundlanders and 50 or 60 Marines. The military put restrictions on after the riot. He said, we had to deal with a few crooks, a few prostitutes, never got much time off. I did some investigative work for James Edgar Hoover while I was stationed in Placentia and Argentia. We as constabulary officers were trained as airplane spotters during the war. The day the Atlantic Charter meeting occurred between Roosevelt and Churchill, we as police knew there was something big going on, but that's all we knew. They weren't even told. That's how secret it was. This is really interesting too. There's a policeman stationed in Argentia, big guy like him. They knew who he was. Bill Daly was always in on the base doing investigations. So he said, one day I got arrested down on the base in full police uniform because they had moved the office of the U.S. legal officer, Captain Browne. I was walking down the road for a meeting with Browne at his former office when a Marine came up to me with a gun and told me I was trespassing and was under arrest. I was later released once they found out and talked to Captain Browne. I heard the police officer in full uniform been arrested over a gun. So I guess we're pretty tough times. God help the poor civilians. The police used taxi when they had to. There was no police car in Argentia for that. Mostly we had to walk everywhere. We would start our patrol at dawn. We had to do a lot of walking. Get this now. And Ian, as an accountant, would be interested. He said a meal would cost us $1 then. Discipline was extremely important to keep the men in line because we had to do so much work during the war. As police officers, we were all given respect in the world from the people out there. He said, I enjoyed my life in Argentia as a police officer. He went on to say, and you can remember that, it was in one of your books, and it was a fabulous book, Under the Clock, that a lot of people had stuff to do, and I really enjoyed it. The research was tremendous. What can I ask you the next time? There's a small change I'd like you to make. In the book, it refers to Staff Sergeant McCormick of the RCMP losing his eye. It was Sergeant McCormick of the Newfoundland Constabulary. And Bill Daly tells the story. He said the officer went on to tell in 1948, not 1950. In 1948, the police were still here. The RCMP hadn't moved in until March of 1950 when we joined Canada. So in 1948, Bill said a terrible incident occurred when Constabulary Sergeant Charlie McCormick's eye was knocked out. The injury was inflicted from a blow to the face by a beach rock wielded by an American serviceman during an altercation on the beach in Placentia. Constable Bill Daly told how he deputized a bunch of young fellows from Placentia, young O'Keefes. He said the O'Keefes chased the sailor into the home of Joachim Murray. Joachim tells the story of the door. This is Bill Daly telling us now. Joachim tells the story of the door bursting open and a sailor running into his house, followed by the 2 O'Keefes. Joachim then went out and cut down his clothesline and wrapped them up like a mummy. And Joachim left a piece of clothesline hanging out and passed the rope to the O'Keefes and said, "Here, bring them up to the jail." And Tom Young also had helped out when he guarded the prisoners. There was a court-martial in Argentia base at the time. One serviceman was dismissed or dishonorably. Despite the loss of one eye, Sergeant McCormick went on to join the RCMP in 1950 when the federal force took over rural policing from the Newfoundland when Newfoundland joined Confederation in Canada. And when we joined, just to let you know, and I don't say this again derogatorily, but in 1950, when we became part of Canada, our national police force came in, the constabulary shut down 35 police stations right across Newfoundland, closed them down. The officers were saying, "You and your families are going back to St. John's." And someone said, "Oh no, we're not. We live here. This is our home, this is our children." So what had happened, they were allowed to join the RCMP. So about 25 or so, I think, had joined the RCMP who were regular constabulary. But when you talk to policemen and policemen from that era, they'll all tell you that it left a bitter taste in their mouth. Because the woman said to me, "Gary, I could no longer be promoted because now we've closed down 35 police stations." Where was the ranks coming from? We were all moved into St. John's. Just wanted to bring up, you just think about it, it's another aspect of what we often think of, the great times, and they were. It affected people. My book tells the story of James Lynch, who joined the Newfoundland Constabulary in 1939, just after war was declared. In 1943 and 44, Lynch was posted to Argentia. And this was another big man. Jim was about 6'4". He died there a couple of years ago. Brilliant man. That's the guy who took over the CNR policing in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Jim was a good friend of our families, and he used to tell me of the many experiences he had during the war. While at Argentia, Lynch, like constabulary members stationed throughout the island, were given the duty of assisting the Newfoundland Postal Department in investigating breaches of wartime postal regulations relating to sensitive information in personal letters. And Jim said that he mentioned the letters, and he mentioned the names. I wouldn't do that, of course. There was nothing wrong. But he said he really felt like it was funny because he was reading all these letters from women to their boyfriends and love and all this stuff. He said he really felt like what they had to do. And there was one girlfriend in the Placentia area who kept writing this person and telling him stuff. And Jim said, "I had to go down and tell her, will you stop writing this stuff on your letter?" And he said he felt so foolish. He said, "Here's this big 6'3" or 4" policeman. He's going to this lady and saying, "Will you stop talking about love and this and that? And where he's stationed or where you're stationed or how many ships are coming in?" And it was really funny. He said throughout the war, the police had to do this everywhere, looking at people's personal mail. It's different, isn't it? What? You can't take ourselves out of those times. We've got to look at what happened during those times. Jim was also required to go aboard trains. Here he is there. There's Jim in the station here in Argentia. Jim said he had to go aboard the trains, and they had to look for enemy agents, enemy aliens, people trying to get into Argentia and Placentia under, disguise of being laborers. And he said often the military police would go right through the trains. Everybody out, up. Let me see your identification. And that's a picture of Jim. I was lucky to get that. I came upon that it's a bit poor in condition. But he was quite an individual. He also said he accompanied U.S. military and intelligence officers in the search for enemy aliens and agents. He said the biggest problem, of course, in wartime St. John's was dealing with the thousands of servicemen. This is interesting. Here's what Jim stated. The Americans were the most quiet of the troops. The worst for fighting and drinking were members of the Canadian Navy, whose corvettes would come into port after being at sea for months. And the sailors, this is strange, the sailors were mostly farm boys from Saskatchewan and that area. And he said they put the place up on it. So this is not coming from me. This is coming from a police officer. This guy right here, who served. In a November 30, 1943 letter to Inspector Mahoney, U.S. Major Robert Mawson expressed the appreciation to Constable Lynch of the Constabulary Argentia Station and to the force for its cooperation during a recent reconnaissance of Placentia Bay. At the request of the United States Army Counterintelligence Group, Constable Lynch accompanied Special Agent Flynn, there it is there, on an intelligence reconnaissance of the northern part of Placentia and the southern part of Trinity Bay. The purpose of the trip was to visit remote villages in order to investigate any report of suspicious persons, activities, or incidents in the vicinity. The reconnaissance team visited Lamont, Little Harbor, Little Southern Harbour, Arnold's Cove Station, come by chance, Sunnyside, and spoke to residents here in an effort to receive any information. Constable Lynch and these agents were impressed by the lack of rumours and the report of any strange boats or any people in the area. In the letter to Chief O'Neill in 1944, Major Cowles of the U.S. Marine Corps Commanding Officer Argentia commended the constabulary, and here's what he said to the chief in his letter. It is with the greatest pleasure that I commend you and those under your command for the splendid cooperation and assistance rendered in certain investigations involving the naval personnel in Newfoundland. It has been my privilege to work with the constabulary officially and converse with them unofficially. In all my dealings with them, I have found them to be friendly, courteous, fair, just, tactful, painstakingly helpful, and ever mindful of their course or the cause they serve. The following members of your command are hereby especially commended for their outstanding cooperation. Listen to the names and where they were from. Inspector Whale, St. John's. Head Constable Bussey, Carabinier. This is where they were stationed. Sergeant Carroll, Placentia. He was writing about these men. Sergeant Trickett, Briggs. Sergeant Richards, Harbour Grace. Constable Dolph Nash, cousin of ours, stationed at Placentia. Constable Lynch, stationed at Placentia. These men were all been written about and commended for their work with the U.S. naval investigations during the war. He said the services rendered by these men are in keeping with the finest traditions of the Newfoundland Constabulary. And as I said, 3 of the policemen had served in Placentia. Speaking of Constable Lynch, I want to quickly share with you some interesting information in Constable Lynch's Placentia travel. And he put in a travel claim which he gave me many years ago. And the travel claims are here. I don't mind you taking a copy of it. I'm sure you're going to ask me because you're a historical society. Every time I bring up something, they say very interesting. This was a travel claim done by Mr. Lynch, Constable Lynch here in Argentia. And it says James Lynch, stationed Argentia, and was in January 26, 1944. Here's what he did. He said he took a first-class train fare from Placentia to Arnold's Cove, $2.25. He went from, then he had to go conveyance by horse to Arnold's Cove, 30 cents. He was investigating an interpretation and letters from people in the Swift Current area. Supper on the SS Home en route to Cax Beach, 60 cents. Board and lodgings at Mrs. Hamilton in Cax Beach, $2. Board and lodgings to Mrs. Warfield in Harbour Buffett, $2. Breakfast for myself on the SS Home, 60 cents. Breakfast for a prisoner on the SS Home and dinner, 60 cents. And it all came to $8,075. On October 17, 1943, Jim took a train fare to and from Long Harbour for the purpose of licensing dogs in the vicinity. The whole trip cost him $2.05. This other one was conveyance to Constable Randall and myself from Argentia to Fox Harbour while attending the garden party. We all know it's a pretty wild garden party. So the 2 police officers, Randall and Lynch, go up to the garden party, and it cost them $1. Freight charges paid on 3 chairs sent by people from the Royal Stores to the police office, 35 cents. And finally, it said Argentia, 1943, payment for dinner and supper to John Power, Ship Harbour, while making a patrol there on October 7th, $1. So I thought that was really neat when I looked about it, and it had to do with Argentia and Placentia, so I wanted to bring that up to you. In my book on To Serve and Protect, I wanted to draw attention to a critical but truly necessary component of policing, and that is the police officer's family, especially mothers and wives. They too always seem to be neglected. Wives and mothers were the nails that kept the police family foundation together, and without them, the structure would quickly fall apart. Before closing and leaving the book To Serve and Protect, I have just a number of pictures I'd like you to see. This is the American ship that came in with all the servicemen on, and as you can probably see here, this is when they first came to St. John's to build Pepperell. See the police officers? Look what they're wearing, the old sealskin caps, black sealskin caps, 3 of them there. The promised guy would be a sergeant, you can just see his rank, and 2 members. These were visitors and servicemen going in on that ship. Some of you may remember, but I hope I'll bring back good memories to you. Very interesting picture of American servicemen in St. John's on Long's Hill. My mom and dad lived on Long's Hill during the war. Most people, the historians, will pick it up. Anyone see anything different in that picture that strikes you quickly? One thing? Yeah. One other thing. See this? What's that?
No.
That was for the blackout. All cars had to paint their fenders white. All cars. And because in the night times, in order for people and pedestrians and the police to see them, because as you know, the lights were dim on blackout, and I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to show. This looks like a police officer walking up. This is an American serviceman with a little kid there. But I thought that was really interesting for you. You had to have the white cars on your stove during the war. Here's the constabulary officer, Constable Moores, telling to Americans where to go, but I don't mean that. He was giving directions to American servicemen. So a pretty neat picture. And these things here, those who are old enough to remember, anytime the police officers were on duty doing traffic, they had to wear. I can remember my mom mumbling about trying to keep these things clean and put starch in. That's what they had to wear during the war years. This was a picture taken during the war years of constabulary practice, and I mentioned my uncle. Also, my uncle Matthew White. Matt White's from St. Bride's, and he is a legend in policing in St. John's during the war. Uncle Matt used to teach the drill, and he was a head constable when he retired, so that's him right there. And this is the Chief of Police O'Neill, and this is what I talked about in Inspector Mahoney, who ran that tremendous security division during the war. This was the terrible burials of men and people who were killed in the fire at the Knights of Columbus. That were all around. This was only one part. There's more over here. But they call it the week of funerals in St. John's at the time. It was so tragic. These were mostly servicemen and civilians who died in that awful fire. You see their friends and comrades here praying over them. And, the war wasn't too far from us, was it? We weren't hearing about it in the papers. We were part of it, and we should always remember that. And remember the sacrifices of these brave people who came here, a lot of other countries, to help keep the world free. And also a lot of our civilians, young women who had died during that terrible, terrible fire, and how they couldn't get out because the doors were locked and everything. Right? So I wanted to show you that picture. Again, police officers, it's interesting, as long as you can remember the cape. I don't really see, we used to wear capes. I wore a cape when I joined in 1972. And it was really different. Of course, my dad and them wore it. But in those times, everybody smoked. And so the police officers who were on duty, the sergeants would be going around all the time. The boys would have the capes on. And they'd have a cigarette and have the puff. When they see there's no one coming, they see a car coming, they just put their hands inside. And many times I used to be there laughing, and the sergeant would be talking, and the sergeants would know. They were just looking at me, see smoke coming up through the air. But that was the old cape. It was a lovely thing, but it was very dangerous. Because when we used to get in fights, people would grab it and put it around their heads. And you could get one beaten by pulling it out of your head and a kick in the face. So it was a lovely piece of uniform, but it wasn't a very sensible operation. And I still have mine at home. These are all veterans, including myself. But this was a picture, I don't know if anyone remembers, this man was stationed here in Placentia, Charlie Walsh. Constable Charlie Walsh. And Charlie's health is failing him now, and I'm so sorry. There about 3 or 4 years ago when I was putting my book together. Charlie was a good friend of my dad's. And I said to Charlie and Bill Daly, Bill was alive at the time, God, he's dead now. And I tried to set up a day to come out here, and it was snowing, and I couldn't make it. And things had gone on, and I was busy writing the book, and I never got out. Of course, Bill died, and Charlie's still alive today. He's not a good help. These were big, strong men. This gentleman here, Sergeant Kevin Murray, from the Marys from down in St. Joseph. Kevin was working at Argentia as a young Newfoundlander, and he saw the policeman there, and he said, "Boy, that looks pretty sharp, fellow. That's a good job." And he asked him, the policeman, he said, "Yes, boy, it's a good job. Go and see the chief of police, boy. You're a young, strong, vibrant fellow. He had grade 11 at the time. He could type. The nuns taught him how to type. So he said, Kevin, go in. So Kevin goes into the chief of police, and he joins up in 1942. Kevin married. So Kevin was here working in Argentia. Well, I was so sorry I didn't get out here with Charlie. He was going to show me where he boarded, and unfortunately, and I hope that your historical society knows where these places are. And I hope I could help you find them, but I think it's important that, someone can say that house, the police constabulary used to stay here. And that has no negative reflection on the present police officers with the RCMP. The RCMP are a fantastic, world-respected police force. But what's wrong with celebrating these men who are no longer here? They are in your community, they are proud of your community, and they worked hard when your families and your mothers and fathers were in bed. These men walked the streets and did things here. But this was a picture I cherish, and like I said, I'm so sorry I didn't get out there with Charlie Walsh and Bill Daly. And these were the two gentlemen, Ian, that were out on the horseback during our parade last year. They wanted to come out. It was a junior officer student that wanted to come out. They said, no way, we're senior, we're going to Placentia. So I tell you, they wanted to come back to the groups. They played a big role in our parade last year. And of course, this is the Newfoundland Constabulary legacy. I don't know if any of you visited this park at the bottom of Long's Hill. We're so proud of that. I was on a committee. It took us 7 years. So Ian did a lot of work to get this. And this is done by internationally renowned sculptor Ruben Boycott, who was world renowned. And we waited so long. And I was on that committee. And boys used to torment me. I always said, no, guys, we want to do it in the period costume around the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so I talked about the bullseye lantern. The boys used to torment me. They said, looks like a Tim Hortons mug or a John Pierce. Boy, how much torment did I get about that? And I said, no way, it's going on. But anybody know? I can probably tell you something now that I know. I haven't told too many people. I haven't got no. This guy is about 6'3". Does anyone know who he was? I guess what you call it, the sculpture was made in his image from a picture. Does anyone know what a police officer is? No. He's from this area, not too far. Marina, do you know?
No, but I read it. It's all I get to me.
Councillor Ambrose Conway from St. Bride's. And we found a picture, because Jim Lynch was alive then, and Jim knew him. And we found a picture of him. Jim said he was one of the tallest police officers in the force, and he was big. And my brother can remember seeing him in St. Bride's, and he was with Don McGraw at the time. Don was his stepfather, and they were in a Volkswagen. And he said this man was walking down the road, 6'4", and Don pulled up and said, "Take him down to church. It was raining." And he said, "Jesus, Don, I can't get in there." My brother. Well, here's the other funny part about it. We found this picture, and we used it. We gave it to Ruben Boycott, and I'm so happy they say I'm prejudiced, of course I am, that we used it. But honest to God, I promise you, I didn't know. But then, a short time after that, my sister-in-law, Rose Lundgren from Browne, she married my brother Keith. That's Rose's uncle. Right, her mother's uncle from St. Bride's. And so when the boys found out about it, they said, "Oh, Jesus, Browne, now we know why." And honest to God, I had nothing to do with that, right? What this is, next time we visit us, this is a constable's likeness, Constable Ambrose Conway from St. Bride's. So that's something you can jag counties about when they go in and say, "I'll go on, but give it up, you couldn't even find it, not big enough." Don't say I said that. Just quickly now, because I know it's been long and you've been great. It's so hard because, as you can tell, the passion that I have for these books and for Newfoundland, it's hard for me. I spend, my wife will tell you, 12, 13 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week researching these books over the last number of years. And Tom, I pity you or anyone else when they come and say, "Gary, we'd love for you to give us a talk on your book." Oh God, you got about 40 to 50 minutes or an hour. And I said to my wife, I said, "How do I tell the story? You know, all these people are so important to me. So when I come, I could have kept you here and brought you back for a week. I mean it. So I'm here, and it was a real strain on me to try and see what I could put in. This is, I was at St. Bounds, well, as Dean knows, and Mary, at 6:30 this morning, and Tom set up a meeting for me. I never got to bed until 2 o'clock last night at the computer trying to get this thing to work, my thing. I went to bed, at 5:45 I got up. Tom had an interview with me on CBC radio for 6:30. I was down at CBC. I left CBC at 10 o'clock. I was up to St. Bounds for a veterans, World War I veterans, I guess, parade they had, because they have 40 young St. Bounds students going to Vimy Ridge and Beaumont Hamlet next week. The 40 of them I lectured to months ago, and each one is carrying my book, Soldier, Priest, and the boys who follow over there with me. So I was there at 12 o'clock. So when I came out here, and that's why I said to Mary, I was like, "God, make this work for me." If you haven't seen a grown man cry, you might see him do it tonight. This man here was unbelievable. Padre Thomas Mann. Some of the older people may know. He's from St. John's. He went. His mother died young. He went into I'm starting to shut down now. He went into the orphanage, and then he went to St. Bounds, and he was very bright. And then he went into priesthood. But when the war broke out, he wanted to go with the men from St. Bounds in Newfoundland who were joining the regiment, and he was a priest then. And he put in for it, and the British came back and said, "We don't need Catholic priests." Yeah, okay, that was early on in the war. And then Beaumont Hamlet happened, and the war started to deteriorate, and it was hundreds of thousands of servicemen killed. And people from the Catholic countries were saying, hey boys, we don't have enough padres there, Catholic padres. We'd like, if our men are going to go there and our children, that's what they were a lot of them, if they're going to die, we want a Catholic padre to help them be with them, if they could be. This guy finally joins up, and I tell the story of Padre Nangle, but he became a lieutenant colonel. And in policing, I often talk, and we were told about post-traumatic stress, and we teach that if a police officer goes through an accident and a child or a person dies, that police officer should be immediately given post-traumatic stress interview to make sure there's no problems with it, and rightly so. I remember this guy here and doing the research on him. And he recruited young Newfoundlanders when he joined the regiment. He came back a number of times from Europe. He recruited Newfoundlanders to join up. They joined up, a lot of them boys. He went over, he went in the trenches with them and prayed with them and saw them under stress, and they were under tremendous stress. He buried them. And his son told me, his son's still alive, a good friend of mine. He's an older man. But he said it killed his father to see the same ones he recruited dying. And he did that right through the war and buried them. And he was getting letters from the mothers of Newfoundland asking them, where's my son buried? He's only 17, can you at least tell me that? And Nangle was really upset because he couldn't tell him, because the place was just bombed to death. And he went through that. That was enough. After the war was over, the Newfoundland government asked him would he go back to Britain and go to the killing fields in France and Belgium and Gallipoli to identify and try to exhume the bodies of the dead Newfoundlanders. And his son told me that his father used to come back from, this was just after the war, come back from Belgium and France, and he would smell like the decaying, it's a thing that happens to those of you who know who are in the medical service and the emergency service. He said his father would always smell it. He'd take lots of showers to try to get the smell of death off. And you talk about post-traumatic stress. And I was at St. Browne's this morning, and that's where he's from. And the teacher is giving the book out, and the officer, I said to the principal, Principal, it's time for you to get Colonel Nangle's picture put up here in St. Browne's. He totally agrees. So hopefully in the not too distant future. So that was a book that I also had to be very proud of. But this is the book that took most of it out of me, was The Fallen Boy Soldiers. I spent nearly 3 years doing nothing but investigating death and mothers' letters. And I'm telling you, some of the letters are in there, and I've had people call me from all over the world, and I've had mothers call me and say, Gary, I could only read a chapter a night, because it was so powerful and so heart-rending to mothers. And my wife would tell me, she'd have to listen to this. I'd say, here, what do you think of this? Read this chapter, or what do you think of it? And she'd say to me, I've had enough for the night, Gary. And didn't call me, because she thought of her sons. And only a mother knows. And this really had an effect on me for the whole time I was at it, because look at those faces. God, they're not even Boy Scouts. 272 of them died fighting for the land while the war was on. Babies. And they never came back. And one of the, I have a quote here, where was it? Which made me quite proud. Professor Fred Hawksley. Like I said, I'm not an academic, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not a literary person. I write how I feel from my heart. And so what Fred wrote in my book, The Forward, and he summed it up a lot better than I could. And he said, Gary has made these forgotten children of Newfoundland live again, and he's helped us to know in the context of their teenage playgrounds of trenches, mud, blood, and the horror of the Great War. They had no chance to blossom into tenacious Newfoundlanders, the ones they might have become, and to return and take their place like the forget-me-not, to cling to the hard and unforgiving rock of their beloved island home. Through Gary's groundbreaking work, he has helped us come to know them and to remember them. Ladies and gentlemen, there were 3 of these young boy soldiers from Placentia who lost their lives in World War I, who are mentioned in my book, namely Private Delaney of Placentia, James Croucher, and William Donahue, the units are not in small. I can tell you a whole story about this, but I want right now of trying to get the names right. Who was a Donahue and who was a Donahue? Oh my! But we had fun doing it, but at the same time we did it respectfully. But there was Private James Croucher and William Donahue of Point Verde. These were 3 boy soldiers in this area who died during the war, and I talked about them. One of the things, ladies and gentlemen, that astounded me was Mr. Croucher's grief in losing his son. And despite that grief, and they hadn't found his son's grave until 1922. And the letters are in there of him writing on behalf of his wife, saying, can you please give us an idea where he's buried? And they had no idea, but they did find out in 1922. So here's Mr. Croucher from Point Verde. And at that same time, he was assisting other families in Placentia in obtaining information relating to their son's death. On April 9, 1919, Mr. Thomas Croucher wrote Lieutenant Warren of the Regiment Records Office on behalf of Mr. John Donahue of Point Verde, who was looking for a pension over to his young son, who had died at the young age of 18 years. In my book, Fallen Boy Soldiers, I clearly identified 272 teenage boys who lost their lives in World War I. Their parents, their hometowns, their ages, their time of death, where they were buried, if they were buried, and other tombstone-related data. And I stressed for months over that because I was always worried I was going to miss something. And I said, how can I take a call from a mother or a grandmother or someone saying, Gary, why did you miss so-and-so? He was 16, and he's not in your book and we're hurt by it. So I had a lot of trouble trying to get this book out, and it took a lot out of me, but I'm so proud of it today. I won't say to you that I'm 100% correct in getting them all, but it's been out a couple of years now, and I hadn't had one call other than thanks. And one gentleman did call me, and he said, Gary, he said, you missed it. I said, oh, it was a call I dreaded. He said, you missed it. I said, okay, so who was it? He told me the name. He said he was 18. I looked into it, and I looked into it hard. He was 21. And I went, whew. But I had to call him back and tell him. I said, no, sir, he wasn't a boy soldier, he was 21. Oh, thanks very much, Gary. And he was really kind. It didn't mean to him. I sweated bullets before I got back to him. The book Soldier, Priest and Killing Fields is the other one. And ladies and gentlemen, if anyone is interested, and if you don't want to buy the books, I have a couple here tonight, but that's not what I'm here for. If you don't want to buy the books, go to a library. If you want to buy them, they're in St. John's, at any of the bookstores, or you can go online and Google them under DRC Publishing, and if you want to look at them. But I'm not here to sell the books. I'm here to sell you on remembering these people. As a matter of interest, I am presently working on my fourth book about policing in the 1880s, and I can tell you, Placentia looms large in it. And this book, thanks be to God, it's not about death, it's not about mother's letters, it's not about padres burying soldiers, or not about policemen under attack and stress. It's about policemen, but I'm going to tell a story that you'll really enjoy and you laugh about, because there's a lot of it going on in Placentia. And I'll just give you a little teasing, and a lot of it has to do this morning. I also just want to now sincerely thank the Placentia Area Historical Society and the Placentia 350 Incorporated for inviting me here tonight at the first in a series of Meet the Author. And it's in this beautiful Placentia Bay Cultural Center. It's been a long night. I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. It's been a pleasure and honor for me to be here with you. You know how proud I am of my roots of this area, and will always be. And look, don't ever stop as Newfoundlanders trying to look after and bring these people up. And I have to again commend your people here, your legions, and and I honestly say, not because he's here, but Ian is one of the finest volunteers that I've worked with, and someone who cares so much about the people of Placentia and their history. And I know from your historical societies, your festival flags groups, the people you have working for all your societies here, you have a lot to be proud of. And Placentia, on your 350th anniversary, stand up and be even more proud. Thank you very much. Quick comments, I'd gladly take them. Yes, ma'am.
How were they armed? Were they armed?
Police, mostly with a bat. That's all. Now, it's funny you bring that up, but in St. John's, the policemen were getting such a beating that the chief of police came out and said to them, "From now on, you will start protecting yourselves and use your batons," because they were getting beat up. The police officers used their batons. The military started complaining about the police overusing batons. But they were pretty tough times, and that's all they had. And they had the guns and the rifles back at headquarters, or if they needed them when they were going on board ships to arrest. But the majority of men, when they weren't doing specialized intelligence duty, all they had. And when they walked that beat in the nighttime, when there was, I remember I said to you of all the meals they were given, when these people came out in the night times on St. John's, and whether in Argentia or wherever, in Gander or Corner Brook, that these men in the blackout, there was two of them, and all they had were batons. That's all they had. So it's pretty tough times, and again, I hope, I didn't bring you here tonight to tell you about negative things, and all I've asked you to do, I'm trying to tell the story. But it's the other side of the story. A lot of you are historians, and you got to tell both sides, haven't you? Anyone else have a question or a comment? Okay, Tom, I'm going to grab my glass of water and run.
Okay, Gary, I certainly want to express our appreciation for you helping us discover Placentia and telling some stories of the past, both of our local policemen and the policemen in St. John's. It's certainly an interesting night. I think I should also mention and thank you for the role you're playing in helping to get the policemen recognized and in recognize the work of some of our servicemen. Needless to say, this was quite entertaining for me because, like, I remember a lot of this. I can remember the riot when the Americans and the Newfoundlanders got in, and I was in front of my house. Anyone remembers Mary Miller's store across the road? That's where it took place. And the other one I can remember is when we caught the American serviceman in Joachim Murray's porch. And he was tied up on the floor, and we walked up the road behind him holding onto these ropes. And of course he's out in the States and don't know what we're like. We were saying things like, we should hang this fellow from the So it was quite an exciting time, and I don't think I was the only O'Keefe'er because I wasn't big enough to do much. I was about 12 or 14 in those days, but it's really entertaining to hear these stories. And I certainly appreciate what Gary has done for us, and I believe, by the look at the attention there, that most people enjoyed it. So once again, I'd say thank you, and tell you to hang around and have a cup of tea and some refreshments down the now, and give me a chance to talk to Gary if you need to, if his wife will leave him free for another few minutes. Thank you very much. I'm going to wait now. Did you have...
What kind of money were they making?
Pardon me?
What kind of pay were they making?
So I'll tell you so little. When my dad retired in 1958, he had 4 children. His pension was $99 a month. So the wages were phenomenally low, and they were almost an insult. And these men had to take that torture. You know why they took it? Because they were proud Newfoundlanders and they were doing their part. And they were not allowed, I didn't mention it early on, but it was 25 or 30 constabulary officers joined the war after the war broke out. The government of Newfoundland said, that's it. They called a special session of the House, and they ordered that no more police officers are allowed to join the fighting services of Her Majesty. Because why? They were losing police officers and they needed them here. So they weren't allowed to join. So what they did, and a number of them were really upset they couldn't join, but what they did their bid on the home front, and it wasn't small. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.